Hello, and thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing Bias Thinks First. My name is the Reverend Amantha Barbee, and I am the senior pastor at Oakhurst Presbyterian Church in Decatur, Georgia. I am delighted to be with you today and to go into these discussions about bias and how we can grow with, learn from, and go deeper into these things that drive our thought process. Very soon I'll be joined by Charlie Kopp, who works with social justice at Oakhurst. He does a phenomenal job. And you will hear two different realities, as you will notice that Charlie and I are very different people. But we love the Lord. We are fighters of justice, fighters for justice, fighters for peace. And we know it starts right up here. So we hope that you will gain great insight today and take some tools with you to take back to your own congregations. And we are available to you. Again, thank you for joining us today. We're called to be. So, Charlie, how long have you been at Oakhurst?
I've been at Oakhurst. Let's see, I came in February of 2006 to a dinner on a Wednesday night.
Okay.
And then have stayed since. So what is that? 14 going on 15 years.
Charlie is a husband and a father, two boys that are just amazing. Charlie's oldest and I stood side by side and fought for justice as it relates to getting that first monument in the whole state of Georgia down. That was a powerful day. And one of the things we try to do is lead by example. And I think just the visuals and the power of me standing there with Charlie's son that day is about walking the walk and not just talking the talk, but walking the walk as well. So Charlie, tell me about your work at Oakhurst and the committee through which you do your work at Oakhurst.
Yeah, so I help coordinate the race, ethnicity, and diversity team at Oakhurst Presbyterian Church. We are a group that gets together and meets to explicitly and directly have conversations around the power of oppression, race being such a big one here in the United States. And we try to put on different events to help not just the congregation, but the community. So that ranges from, when Stacey Abrams was beginning her push for the governorship here in Georgia, one of the first places she spoke at was Oakhurst Presbyterian. So we'll have speakers come in and speak. We'll also put on panels that will focus on different things from education to talking about elections and voter suppression and those kind of things. We'll also have times for congregational discussions where we'll have the whole congregation come and have a lunch, and we'll look at an article like The Myths of Racism, the 10 myths white people believe about racism. And we'll go through that as a congregation with each other and do that work of seeing those myths, how they apply to us, and how we can work to bond together more as a congregation together. And then we'll also get into different trainings, like bias training we did for Lent, a 21-day challenge to overcome bias. And so we had a kind of a journal that we went through and videos we watched. We did that during the week, and then we met on that to talk about those things as a group and continue to explicitly address all of those forms of oppression. And then also connect as much as we can with the community. So we're talking about the Confederate Monument, so working with the local NAACP to put our church behind them as well, and call for that Confederate Monument to come down, and in other areas. So working in affordable housing in the city of Decatur, making sure that our church, Oakhurst, has a statement and a voice at these meetings to put affordable housing policies in place in the city. So just in all of these different areas, the Red Team tried to support that idea of the true beloved community.
So it's exciting to be doing this work, this important work, and it's mandatory work. I think it really is mandatory work. So as we go through what we must do today, we're going to take a look at how our cultural bias, if gone unchecked, can be a major roadblock to racial, political, gender, and cultural healing. We're going to examine our biases that cross racial, socioeconomic, educational, and gender lines, and we'll discover opportunities to see how our own biases impact our thinking, our actions, and our responses.
At the end of the workshop, we'll have some valuable tools for you. These tools are things that we've used at Oakhurst, talking about the Racial Equity 21-Day Challenge, but then also our myths session that we went through. We'll be able to share that with you so you can walk away with tools that can help you in your congregation. And so this will allow us to see hearts first before our preconceived and often judgmental biases. You'll be able to use this guide to structure a program that works in your context.
So we're excited for you to be here with us today. We are available even after the virtual workshop is over and after the conference is over. We are available because we're not just about fighting for justice at Oakhurst. We're about fighting for justice across the globe. So thank you for being with us today. We appreciate it. So it's the example of, if I'm not wearing this and you and I walk in a room, both of us have on a t-shirt.
Yep.
Who's the pastor?
That's right.
Charlie.
And like I always say, like I'll catch myself, like if you're driving down the street and there's a construction crew putting a new sidewalk in or something like that, and you drive by and there's a mixture of races there working, who do you unconsciously think is in charge, right?
Right.
And getting to those biases.
And that's different between a prejudice, or it's different than racism.
Right.
It's what our first thoughts are, and they really guide us in so many ways.
Right.
So we come to all of these conclusions based on the first thing we saw.
Yep. And then going back to like that idea of increasing our stories. So, obviously as an educator, you increase the stories that you have of all kids, but now when you see someone, maybe 10 years ago, you would have thought, oh, this certain bias, but now it's like, well, that student or that person might be similar to a student that I once knew, or whatever, so that your stories increase so much that when you see someone, you don't think a certain thing, but you think of the story that connects to you, which is based in reality, like, oh, that person is a lawyer, or that person was a teacher, or that person sent me a card when I was grieving, like, as opposed to it just being that bias.
So you work with basketball players and you do some recruiting.
Yeah.
How has your personal bias work, and I know you've done a lot of it,
Yeah,
changed how you go about that process? You change your work?
Yeah, well, I think like you, and I've worked with other guys on our coaching staff too about how you approach this. But like if you especially from a quote unquote high academic expensive place that you have to pay, when you would go to a tournament, right? So you go to a tournament and there's 60 teams playing. Would you go to a court and you're trying to just kind of randomly see players? Would you go to a court that has two black teams playing together? Would you go to a court where you've got a black and a white team? Because you might biasly look at, well, I assume that I probably would be able to find a recruit on a white team. And so fighting through that. And then for me, the thing that I've done is made sure that I'm open to all filters, so that like I give every single kid who comes across my desk like the appropriate attention and evaluation, whether you are at a prep school in New England or whether you're at a public school in Alabama. That like you're and going through that, and not when someone shows you a highlight video, like or you open it up, you don't think, oh, this player probably couldn't get into our school or couldn't pay for our school, whatever. As opposed to going in and evaluating them just like anyone else, and then seeing how that process goes. Because if they're good enough, then you go after it. You don't try to let your biases make the decision.
And again, we're not talking about prejudice, it's just how we're
Yeah.
programmed. And as we're looking for a new administrative assistant at the church, we look at resumes and we make decisions based on the first block of the resume. So, in my checking my biases, what I did is remove that and
Yeah.
numbered. I numbered all the resumes.
Yeah.
So all I know is the information in number 12,
Yeah. Right.
the information in number 7.
Yep.
So at the end of the day, when I've narrowed these candidates down to 5 people I want to meet face to face, it's not until I need to find their contact information
Right.
to get that information, because I understand I have biases.
Yeah.
So that's what we mean when we say we have to work
That's the
through.
work, right? Where you said, what, number 4 there? Have you done the work yourself? And are you working, right?
So what was your biggest challenge in really working through the anti-bias training at Oakhurst? What was your biggest hurdle you personally had to jump?
Kind of like while we were doing it, we were in it, or
Before and during.
The before was just kind of setting it up. So like once I knew I had the once I knew I had the the 21 days, now it was a matter of like putting in the effort of like setting it up so it could be accessible to folks. So one thing would be like, well, the first step would be we found something that would be quick and accessible and people could access, because it was like short videos that you could watch pretty easily.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next part was like building the curriculum for it. So when I sent the journal to everyone to have so they could, write their notes down, like creating that journal took a decent amount of time. And so there were some logistical things. Then the other part was we had, and this all happened, of course, when things really took off, COVID, but we had about 40 people who signed up for it. And then in terms of who came, we would range from like 18 to 25.
Right.
So you deal with like the fact that some people might be doing this on their own. Maybe some people wanted to do it but couldn't do it. At that time, COVID and everything's going crazy. Maybe some people, it was too much for them to go all the way in on that big of a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Then once we were inside of it, I think we were pretty fortunate. I think our groups that met were pretty representative. So I don't know if it was 50-50 in terms of like black, white, but it was pretty close.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were lucky to have both of those like sides of the equation in terms of sharing and feeling. But then inside of that is like the old like white folks got to step up and speak more on these topics and how and their process in it, and not just have it be black folks who are commenting and leading the discussions and sharing those things. And so I tried to make it, that's why I made the journal and did all that, so that people would have things where they've typed it down and they've had time to think about it. Right. So they would hopefully be more apt to share. Does that make sense?
It does. And one of the things that we looked at as we worked through our process with the 21 days is not just black and white, but the biases we had against other people of different faiths as well.
Yeah, different faiths, different races. look, and it wasn't just black and white. You're right, but we had a whole week basically where we're learning about the impact of oppression from an Asian perspective, Latino,
Right.
Muslim, um, white,
From the
Native
way we
American.
dress, the way we speak, and all of the preconceived notions we walk in the room with
Yep. And all of
before a
those,
person even gets to speak.
right. And just going back to that idea of the biases, because the biases is where, like you're saying, it cuts across everything from religion and gender and orientation, and obviously in America and in other places, race plays, such a huge part of that. Are you working, right?
Yeah. And it's not a one and done. We're always checking ourselves because we are who we are.
Yeah, and I think these types of exchanges and personal, I don't call them testimonies, but like the personal stories, I think are what can connect to people who would be listening to us, about those real day-to-day things that are going on, that can have such a big impact, right? Because now, I've taken this approach to doing this, and now, and I'm not saying like, uh, we're now going to have the most diverse team Emory basketball's ever had this coming year, but we're going to have the most diverse team Emory basketball has had this coming year. So there's going to be 10. Well, if we can play, right?
Right, right.
There's going to be 10 white players, 7 black players,
Oh,
and
okay.
so, and I've talked with Coach Z. He's been there for 13 years, and um, he didn't think about it, but I'm always seeing everything, and he was like, yeah, right. And I think that that's good because, well, and this might lead into some of the stuff that we're talking about when we do this, is then once you've created that environment, you also have to support that environment
Exactly.
where, like, we don't have a black coach on staff. We should, or it should be a part of the process at
If you
least.
need my help, let me know.
Gotcha. Where you're at least connected to enough people out there that when you ask for like an assistant coach, your pool is so big that it's going to include all kinds of people, and it not just be like just the people because then that's just the other white people that as opposed to this greater pool that could help you out. But basically, it became something where once you put these processes in place, and I don't want to say the opportunity gap is closed, that's the way to say it, is closed, you kind of see these happen. Like the kid who's the rural kid from Alabama,
Right.
who's a young black man who's coming to Emory. Someone could have overlooked him very quickly and be like, oh, he probably can't pay for it. But no, we went down the story and we brought him in and that kind of stuff. And then to another point guard we have from Baltimore coming, kid that went to Oxford. And it's just about like advocating in meetings, right? Not because you're filling a quota, but because you can see this player as someone that can help, and maybe they hadn't looked at that before in that way because it's not some big prep school,
Mm-hmm.
or your friend or the friend that didn't tell you about that player, as opposed to like I knew we needed him because I watched him 10 times because I put the work in to do that. So it's like those kind of things. That's why I felt it was really important this summer that we did the myths of racism with our whole team.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell you, like, you could tell all of our young black men were a little hesitant about this process. They wanted to do it like everyone did, but it was like, ooh, I don't know about this.
Yeah.
And then we got into breakout groups, and then I shared some things. And then by the end, they all started to say things that were impactful. Like, my dad always tells me to wear an Emory shirt all the time because if I'm around Druid Hills or I'm in Atlanta, at least all those people will know it. Well, at least that's an Emory student. Right. Or like he always says, make sure you put an Emory sticker on your car. So if you're somewhere, they might think you're black, but they think that you're at least an Emory student. And like how powerful that is, because I could see some of our white players, like if they're going out on a Friday night,
Hmm.
saying to them like, "Yo, man, why are you wearing an Emory basketball shirt? What are you doing that for?" But
Protecting myself.
protecting myself. But and so we got to that space and that place. So there's support there, so they know that. And then after, they all were texting me saying, "Hey, thanks so much for doing that." It opens the door to be okay to talk about that stuff.
Absolutely.
I had my teammate Coco Archibong, who's a wealth manager now. He's Nigerian American, and so it was real good for them to see our relationship because we were roommates and we stay in contact with each other. So that helped them build some of that space, and they were asking to talk to him. So that's good. We'll keep helping them know, hey, like the other night we had a meeting and we went through, okay, this is how you vote. These are all the things that you need to do to make sure you go vote, but that you continue to support that process.
Yeah. And it's not only continual support, it helps us to be prepared for what's coming. Our world is becoming more diverse.
Yeah.
Not just our congregations, but our workspaces,
Yep.
our neighborhoods are becoming more diverse. So it empowers us not just for our immediate surrounding, but for what we're living into and what we're called to be
Yeah.
as Christians.
Yeah.
You know, God didn't create all of these subsections of people not to be in community.
Right.
We were created to be in community.
Yeah.
So I
No.
think it's important as we do this work. If you're looking for employers, if you're looking for a new pastor, if you're looking for a new associate pastor or youth director, be mindful of the biases you're walking in the room with and do your homework before you enter into that space so
Yeah.
that those biases and those realities are not covering the decisions you make.
Right. And then your biases manifest in what your processes look like and
Hmm.
what your congregation looks like. I know it was always interesting to me, and it's always difficult for me to understand, even though I kind of do, the part where like we were Church of the Brethren, so cousins of the Mennonites and the Quakers, and it was
Hmm.
like your faith, everything you look in your faith in the Bible is through the lens of the Gospels. And so from that, like that, if you're trying to figure out the highest priority or whatever, like you go to the Gospels,
Right.
as opposed to like, well, this one Old Testament saying says this, so I guess that's okay, and you have the Gospels. Like, no, it's like through the filter. And so it always amazes me when it's so difficult for Christians to connect to fighting racism and going against all these things because it was like, well, I thought I was supposed to take Jesus seriously, right? The whole, turn over the tables when things aren't right and have all kinds of different people around you and all of those kind of things. I thought I was supposed to take Jesus seriously.
Right.
And it's always so that seed is what kind of pushes me to or has been in me to kind of continue on that way.
I hope that you have gleaned quite a bit from my discussion with Charlie and the work that we've done at Oakhurst, what we've done in our own lives, and the work we do outside the church. And you may have some questions reeling around in your head, and that's okay. This is about questioning mainly ourselves. What is it that we see? What is it that we think? What is it that we do that we really have not put a lot of thought into? And I think during these times of racial unrest, we really have to take a hard look in the mirror to see how we have contributed to it. It's not necessarily race all the time. What do you think when you see a woman walking down the street wearing hijab? What do you think when you see a young man with braids? What do you think when you see a white guy with a golf shirt on and blue eyes? What judgments do we automatically make? Those judgments we make a difference in how we treat the person with whom we're speaking. So you have a worksheet with you, and I'd like for you during this time before we get together is really think about what is bias to you and how does it show up in your life? How does it manifest at work? How does it manifest in your home, in your community, even at church? Now, I will own the fact that we have some built-in communication partners at Oakhurst because we are so diverse. What if you're not as diverse as Oakhurst? Partner with a church that looks very different than yours and be willing to go into these discussions of what we see, often not based on reality at all. That's also a good way to learn your neighbors and to know your neighbors. But think deeply about what bias is to you versus what prejudice is to you, prejudged. And we make judgments on things that may have happened in the past, that may have happened to someone else, but that's different than bias. What is racism? We're asking these questions because we want you to understand that they are not the same thing. Bias is not the same thing as prejudice. Prejudice is not the same thing as racism. Racism is about power and the power structure. If you have no power presently or historically, it's impossible for you to be racist. Think about that. Think about the differences in the definitions because we are talking about bias. What is systemic oppression? Think about the systems that are in place. Think about those things that people of color have to experience just because we're people of color. This is one we often laugh about, but I just want you to start thinking like this. Flesh tone Band-Aids. Whose flesh? Flesh tone hosiery. Whose flesh? Think about it. Systems. Systems designed for those in power. So really make a difference in your mind and in your heart and in your conversations with your conversation partners for this workshop. The difference between bias, prejudice, racism, supremacy, and systemic oppression. Now, they may intertwine. One has to do with the other. But until we face our biases and face those things that we come into the room with before people even open their mouths, how does that make us prejudiced? How does that feed into racism? And how does it support supremacy? And if we wind it back and we deal with those biases and how we think about our siblings, will it help us to start dismantling these systems of oppression? We contend that it will. You look at people differently. We are not who we think we are. We're all children of God. So how fair is it, or how Christian is it, for us to come with our biases? What do people think about you, do you think, before you even open your mouth? It works both ways. So we must deal with our biases. So take some time and think about that and discuss that with your groups, and we'll discuss it together as well. But get a jump on that discussion because that's a hard discussion to have. And then speaking about hard discussions to have, you will hear some things and learn some things during these discussions that are difficult to hear. We cannot grow if we are not honest with one another. So let the difficult discussions happen in love, not out of hatred or malice, but let them happen out of love. If we're honest with one another, we can grow. Just as you heard the example I gave during the conversation with Charlie, I know the biases that I have. Some of them, I still have work to do. It's not a one and done. But we recreate how we are in the world when we understand our biases. So as we go into how we're going to lead these discussions in our places of worship, what are those things that we think about? How do you choose leaders? They need to be approachable. They quite honestly need to be doing the work already. And if you don't have anybody already doing the work, a consultant is okay too. Charlie said, and I said, we will help you because we're about a better world. Leaders need to be doing the work themselves. They need to stay a step ahead, and they need to be honest with those with whom they'll work about how hard the work is. This is not easy. Feelings get hurt. Our feathers get ruffled. It's not easy work. How do you get buy-in from your members? It's preaching, it's teaching in Sunday school and other Christian ed opportunities why this work is important. We think about Jesus' work with the lepers. What if Jesus had gone to the leper colony with his biases? We would have a very different outcome. But we also see the example where Jesus had an altercation with the woman because she wanted food for her children. And she said, even the dogs get crumbs from the table. Jesus was operating out of his biases, and he had to check himself. He had to do the work. And we are called to do the work of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ set the example for us. So we teach this. We teach this in our Christian education opportunities to prepare our congregation for it. If you are a pastor and you are uncomfortable preaching these types of texts, call pastors who are not uncomfortable preaching these types of texts. One thing COVID has taught us is how to be in several pulpits at one time. Use that tool that you have. And sometimes difficult news is more easily heard and digested if it's coming from a third party. So don't be afraid to reach out for help. You don't have to do this by yourself. What are the outcomes that you're expecting? If you're expecting your entire congregation to be flipped in a 6-week period and not be biased or prejudiced or supremacist anymore, those are not realistic goals. What are your goals for this work? Do you want to increase conversation? Do you want to grow in faith by learning one another? Have detailed goals, measurable goals, so that you'll see if your work is in vain or not. We'd like to see a change. What type of discussions happened after we go through this program? What new ideas came up for fighting for justice for the oppressed? What outreach opportunities came up because now we're willing to work with the Muslim community or the Jewish community or the Hindu community because we have checked ourselves and now able to reach out into the community in a way in which God would be pleased. What are your goals? Every congregation doesn't have to have the same goals. but listen to your congregation. Learn from your congregation. Learn with your congregation and see what your next steps will be. This is the key. And Charlie and I talked about it. Have you done the work yourself? A teacher cannot teach what a teacher does not know. Have you checked your own biases? No excuses. You can't say, oh, I'm not prejudiced. That's not what we're dealing with. Have you checked your own biases? When you see a person dressed a certain way, what do you think? What do you conclude? When you hear a voice on the phone, what do you think? What do you conclude? I will give a prime example. I was at Chautauqua Institute in New York. It's a fabulous place of learning. And I was speaking with a fellow Presbyterian, a white male. He was around 70 years old. And he asks me why I was there. I wonder how many other people he asked why they were there. I was there because I was a member of the new clergy program, hand selected by the president of Union Presbyterian Seminary. And I told him that I was a Presbyterian pastor, and he started listing schools that he thought that I had graduated from. I listened and I smiled. And I told him, no, I'm a graduate of Union Presbyterian in Richmond. He went, oh, I didn't know. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I'm sorry. Biased. He biased me and put me in a box. This is why we must check our biases, because we say some very hurtful, painful, and let's call it for what it is, ignorant things. And we can do better. This work is so important. So important. So do the work yourself. If you are going to lead a group of people into this work, it's just mandatory. It's mandatory to do that. So one thing I would ask is, as you work through this and as we have our later conversation, and we'll discuss this as a group, as how you think this process, even the one that Charlie and I talked about, how you think it will help your congregation. That also goes right along with your goals. We are called to be the people of God, to be stronger together. How is this work going to help us to do that? And how do you see the process helping you? We're only as strong as our weakest link. So if we do the work and become good, strong, anti-bias leaders, will not only affect our congregation, will affect our presbyteries, our communities, our neighborhoods, our states, and our country. And we must do that work. So when we get together, we will walk through our 21-day challenge more in detail, so you can see how this process unfolded. Now, as we said, this is not the only way. This is the way we chose to do it. This is an example, but we will tell you why we chose the process that we did, and we'll talk about more details of the process. But we would like for you to do the work that we've talked about above before we jump into that, because we want you to take away how you can do this work at your place, in your home, in your church homes, in your community. Thank you for being with us today. We're looking forward to seeing you in September. Stay safe, keep your face covered, keep your hands clean, and stay at least 6 feet away. Thanks so much. We'll see you soon.